Well, good morning and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar session today, which will focus on the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency's 2022 to 2023 Violence Intervention and Prevention, or VIP, competitive grant solicitation. I'm Sam Cook, and I serve as a senior project manager within PCCD's Executive Director's Office, and I'm also joined by a few colleagues who I will ask to introduce themselves at this time. Chris, you want to kick us off?
Morning, everyone. My name is Chris Epico. I'm Deputy Director of our Office of Financial Management and Administration.
Morning, my name is Heather Hewitt, and I am an administrative officer that works in the executive offices.
Hi, I'm Alyssa Subsinski. I'm a project coordinator in the executive office. I'm going to turn it back over to Sam. I think that's all of us.
Great, thanks so much. All right, so first let's go over just a couple of quick housekeeping rules. First, today's webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on PCCD's website once it becomes available. We'll also post a copy of today's PowerPoint slides for reference, so don't feel like you have to scribble down everything. We'll certainly make that information available after today's session. We do encourage you to take a moment to check your audio settings to make sure you're able to hear today's presentation. Please note that we cannot hear you on this platform. However, you will be able to submit questions through the written Q&A feature in the Microsoft Teams live event platform. So you'll see that little Q&A button up top. You will not see the questions you submit immediately in that chat, but just rest assured that they've been received and will be reviewed by our team. Moving towards today's agenda, we'll kick things off with a brief recap of the fiscal year 2022-23 VIP competitive grants funding announcement, including some important upcoming deadlines. We'll then spend the bulk of our presentation on some frequently asked questions that have been submitted to PCCD regarding this funding opportunity. And just a friendly reminder that you can view all of the questions we've fielded to date, as well as responses to those questions, on the funding announcement Q&A section of PCCD's website. After we're finished going through some common themes from those questions, we'll reserve the remainder of today's session to answer any questions that you have that have been submitted by participants. To the extent possible, any questions we're not able to get to or address fully today will be answered in that previously mentioned Q&A document. And finally, we'll wrap up with a summary of some additional information and resources for prospective applicants. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and dive right in. So this slide provides a high-level overview of the competitive grant opportunity that you are all here today to learn about, the fiscal year 2022-23 VIP competitive grants funding announcement. On September 6th, PCCD announced the availability of $85.5 million in state and federal VIP funding to support this grant program. These grants are designed to support a wide range of programs and activities that can address community violence. As you can see on this slide, eligible applicants for purposes of this solicitation include community-based or nonprofit organizations with 501c3 status, institutions of higher education, municipalities, counties, and district attorneys' offices. A couple of other additional details and considerations in terms of eligibility before we proceed. Just a note again that community-based organizations need to be a registered 501c3 in order to make direct application for funds. However, use of fiscal sponsors who are eligible to make direct application is certainly allowable for community-based groups that do not have that status. In terms of a project period, that middle section, you can see that eligible applicants can request funding to support project activities for up to 29 months. And approved projects would have a start date of February 1st, 2023. Moving over to budget information, awards under this solicitation will range from maximum budgets of $25,000 to $2.5 million total for project periods, again, spanning up to 29 months. Maximum award amounts are tiered toward the eligible applicant's size and service area, with no applicant able to request more than 50% of their current operating expenditures in their total VIP grant request. Just a note that in terms of calculating those current operating expenditures, you should calculate those as the total amount of operating expenses your organization incurred between July 1st, 2021 and June 30, 2022. As an example, an organization whose current operating budget is $250,000 could request up to $125,000 total in VIP competitive grant funds to support project activities over a 29-month period. Indirect and administrative costs are allowable under the solicitation, but should be kept to a minimum. Applicants and subrecipients can request their federally allowable indirect rate or a de minimis 10% rate pursuant to PCCD and federal guidelines. In terms of eligible and unallowable costs, we certainly encourage applicants to carefully review the written VIP funding announcement for more information about the types of programs, activities, and expenses that are eligible under this funding announcement. The funding announcement document also provides an overview of expenses that are not eligible under this year's grant program. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of those areas when we get to the frequently asked questions section a little later in today's presentation. So in terms of timeframes, the VIP grant funding process this year involves 3 phases. So the first phase is an online initial request form, which is housed in SurveyMonkey, and that is designed to provide a summary of your organization, your proposed project, and some general information about the types of activities and expenses that that project would entail. The second phase, if you're selected to move forward in the application process after that first phase, that would be an invitation for you to complete and submit a formal application in PCCD's eGrants system. The third phase is the award phase. If your organization is recommended and approved by the School Safety and Security Committee, which is the entity that's responsible for oversight of VIP funding. Just a little bit more detail on that timeline. So I feel like there should be a little pin there that says you are here, right? We're in October. We're heading into the tail end of that first phase. So again, the funding announcement was opened and released on September 6th. That application deadline is coming up fast and furious. It is due on October 12th, which is next Wednesday by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. Just a note that all of the requests that are submitted through SurveyMonkey will be reviewed on a rolling basis, and we will be notifying applicants on no later than October 31st, whether or not you've been recommended to move forward in that second phase. So heading into November, we will be opening up for groups that are recommended that competitive eGrants funding announcement, and organizations who are recommended will be invited to apply through early December. VIP competitive applications will then be reviewed and scored in eGrants. As we head a little further into the winter, we'll be going through that review and scoring process, and recommendations will be finalized for all projects by early January. And final funding recommendations will be presented to the School Safety and Security Committee for action on January 11th, 2023, which is their scheduled meeting date. So again, after the committee votes to approve projects, we will certainly notify recommended applicants as well as everyone else in the universe in terms of which projects have been approved, and then those approved projects will have a February 1st start date. So with all that being said, let's move on to the next portion of our agenda, which is our frequently asked questions, or FAQs. So we are going to organize this discussion in a couple of categories, and these include the application process itself, eligible applicants, eligible activities and expenses, project period and project budget, PCCD's grant process, and other types of questions we've gotten to date. So these categories align with the sections of the written funding announcement Q&A tracker document for VIP that we've referenced a couple of times. And if you're looking for where that document lives, you can find it under the funding section of PCCD's website, and that's living under the funding opportunities section on that page. So you can click the link to the funding announcement Q&A webpage, which again is updated quite regularly and provides information in response to questions that have been asked regarding PCCD funding announcements, including the VIP competitive grants solicitation. Again, applicants are strongly urged to read and review this document along with the written funding announcement and related materials before you submit an initial funding request to PCCD. So the first FAQ area we wanted to cover is the application itself in terms of that process. So again, the deadline to submit an initial funding request for VIP funds is fast approaching. You have until next Wednesday, right before midnight, to submit your request in SurveyMonkey. Just a pro tip, the SurveyMonkey form will actually close the instant it turns midnight. So it's sort of like Cinderella, you've got until that time and no later to hit submit. So please make sure that you take care to do that earlier as opposed to later. More detailed information, again, about that application process, as well as some reference guides and templates, are available on PCCD's website. Again, we strongly encourage you to utilize the application templates, those Word or PDF documents, to build and finalize your application content before you start your work online. This will save you a lot of work and potential technology-related heartache. So if you're interested, you can check out the recording of our first informational session on VIP competitive grants funding, which included a detailed walkthrough of the initial funding request form in SurveyMonkey and the VIP application process in general. In addition, our VIP technical assistance project partners at WestEd and LISC hosted a webinar last week that provided some helpful application tips as well. Links to both of those webinar recordings are available for you to check out on our website. And finally, a reminder that interested applicants who are community-based nonprofit organizations are strongly encouraged, but not required, to complete a PCCD grants readiness self-assessment checklist, which is available in the applicant resources section of our website. That document was designed with first-time applicants in mind and provides an overview of the minimum requirements that organizations have to have in place in order to directly apply for and receive grant funding from PCCD, as well as some recommended practices for grantees. So a good resource to check out if you haven't done so already. So we've received several questions about the application process to date, including the examples you see here. Again, we are going to share copies of these slides for future reference, and you can find more detailed information and responses on the funding announcement Q&A tracker document. So please don't feel like you have to scribble everything down. So in terms of that first question that we've gotten, can my organization apply directly for VIP funding if we're included in someone else's VIP application as a proposed subrecipient? So as you can see here, the answer is yes. If you're applying for funding directly and are also included somewhere else in a different application, just make sure you disclose that within each of the applications that are submitted. And you should certainly make sure that the funding requests are not duplicative. We will be cross-referencing submitted applications that reference similar organizations to make sure that you're not asking for the same thing in multiple locations. So just make sure to organize that accordingly. The second question, what do I do if my organization is brand new? So if your organization does not have a full year of expenditures to calculate that maximum budget request that we talked about earlier, so that year between July 1, 2021 and June 30 of 2022, you would be considered to qualify as a micro organization, and the maximum you could come in for under that designation would be $25,000, again, assuming all the other eligibility criteria is met by your organization. Another question we've gotten is around SurveyMonkey itself. So will I get an email confirming my submission? So SurveyMonkey does many wonderful things. Unfortunately, it does not automatically generate an email confirmation for sort of saying, hey, yes, absolutely, your form was submitted. Just rest assured that if you follow the instructions, your form was received. And if you're worried about it, if you're sort of, if it's keeping you up at night, please don't hesitate to reach out. Our team would be more than happy to look you up and make sure that that was in fact received on our end. So moving right along to our second FAQ area, which is eligible applicants. Just a note again that eligible applicants for VIP funds are identified in statute and include community-based organizations, institutions of higher education, municipalities, counties, and district attorneys' offices. So there's been a number of applicant eligibility questions that have been submitted to PCCD so far. That includes a couple of folks asking what the definition of a community-based organization entails. Again, fairly flexible here, but the one parameter you need to keep in mind is that you need to be a 501c3 nonprofit in order to apply directly for funding under the solicitation. We've also gotten a lot of questions from K-12 schools, school districts, charter schools, intermediate units, private schools. So just want to make sure folks are aware that under this solicitation, based on that eligibility criteria, schools are not considered to be eligible to make direct application for VIP funds. However, it's important to note that nothing prohibits a school from receiving services under a proposed application submitted by an eligible entity. And you could also certainly be written in as a proposed subrecipient to provide services under that eligible applicant's proposal as well. Another question we've gotten pretty often is, can I apply if I have already received a VIP or other PCCD grant? Yes, absolutely. There's no restriction. If you already have a grant, you can still come in and request additional funding. Just want to make sure that you're noting in your initial funding request what that grant funding was or is, and that you are also providing any other information that you're asked to throughout the initial funding request. For instance, how this new program or project would build upon or connect to or sort of be different from whatever the case might be for your currently funded or recently funded project. Another question we've gotten in one form or another is, can more than one group or program from a large institution apply? So the answer here is yes. PCCD will consider applications submitted by different departments within a larger institution. A good example for reference here might be an institution of higher education, but there's certainly other examples that might come into play. Just in terms of that last bullet point in question, just a friendly reminder that we are expecting this to be a very competitive solicitation and application process. So with that in mind, coordination and collaboration is strongly encouraged in general, but especially if you are affiliated with the same overarching institution, agency, organization. But again, if you feel your proposal meets the goals and objectives of the VIP funding announcement and a separate proposal is warranted, feel free to submit. As part of our standard approach for reviewing applications, we'll make note of where applications have been submitted from similar entities and organizations, as well as other factors. So moving right along to eligible activities and programs. So this grant program provides very broad latitude to applicants in terms of the programs, activities, and approaches you can use funding to support. So as we discussed earlier, eligible activities and programs for VIP funds are identified in statute and are also listed on pages 5 through 6 of the VIP competitive grants funding announcement. Important to note, there is an other category that can be used for anything that isn't explicitly listed as a category or model, but that aligns with the overall goals and objectives of the grant program. So just a quick reminder of what those goals and objectives entail. VIP funding is designed to provide grants and technical assistance to address community violence throughout the Commonwealth. For the purposes of this funding announcement, we're defining community violence as intentional interpersonal violence, for instance, gun violence and group-related violence, in areas of Pennsylvania that have high rates of violent crime. Funding is intended to prioritize support for effective local intervening and preventive measures to stop gun and group violence that is occurring across the state. So there's a fair amount of latitude, and applicants should, again, review the funding announcement carefully and make the case for why their proposed project or approach aligns with the goals and objectives of VIP. That being said, the written funding announcement also outlines activities and expenses that you are not allowed to use VIP grant funds to support. So those ineligible activities and expenses are listed on pages 6 through 7 of the funding announcement. And applicants should certainly be mindful of those guardrails and limitations as they're developing their project proposal. Finally, if you are looking for some examples of the types of projects that PCCD has supported with VIP funds in the past, we'd encourage folks to check out the grants dashboard and map that's linked on that slide for more information. You can see the 117 projects that were approved last year using these kinds of funds, and you'll see they really do run the gamut for a number of different strategies and interventions. Okay, so we've given some caveats and considerations. Let's get to some of the questions we've received in this area. I would say the most common one we've gotten is, would XYZ program, insert program type here, or specific activity, would that be eligible for funding? So if you're reading through the funding announcement Q&A document, you will probably notice that a lot of our responses here look pretty similar. They start by saying that PCCD cannot advise applicants on specific models, programs, activities, or approaches. So again, we encourage folks to read that funding announcement carefully. And if you think your program or project is aligned with the goals and objectives of the funding announcement, and you're not asking for something that is explicitly identified as ineligible, we certainly encourage you to make your case for why that particular approach or program should warrant VIP funds. Another question we have gotten recently is whether there are any restrictions on the age groups that projects funded by VIP grants can serve. I think this is coming from the fact that some of the eligibility categories come from school code language, which is often obviously connected to younger students. Just know that there are no age-related restrictions that are associated with VIP funding in terms of individuals who are going to be served, reached, or engaged by grant-funded projects. So you can certainly come in for youth-focused activities, but it does not need to be youth-focused in order to be eligible. Adult-focused projects are certainly welcome as well. Another question we've gotten is around what if the program or activity that I want to implement isn't listed. Again, there is an other category where you can describe the types of project activities you'd like grant funding to support. And again, a chance to make your case on why you think it will help prevent or reduce community violence. You should, again, double check that you're not proposing anything that's ineligible or unallowable. And again, that information can be found on pages 6 through 7 of that funding announcement. So in terms of VIP project period and budget, as we've mentioned before, eligible applicants can request up to 50% of their current total annual operating expenditures or $2.5 million, whichever is less. These tiered maximums apply to any organization or agency who is making direct application for VIP funds. So we've gotten a couple of questions to date on this topic, including the examples you see on this slide. One is whether or not VIP grants are considered one-time grants or recurring annually over the 29-month period. So these are one-time awards that, again, can support project periods for an up to 29-month period. So it's not every single year, it's just a one-time deal. So another question we've gotten is whether a program or project has to be operational for that 29-month period. And the answer to that question is no. So that is an up to 29-month period. You could certainly request funding to support project activities for a shorter amount of time. You just can't request funding to exceed that 29-month period. Another inquiry we've gotten is whether you can use projected expenditures instead of your organization's 2021 to 2022 expenditures. The answer to that is no. Applicants need to use past expenditures that were incurred between July 1, 2021 and June 30, 2022 for purposes of determining your organization's total annual operating expenditures, which then tie into your calculations for maximum awards. So at this point, I am going to turn things over to my colleague, Chris Epica, who's going to provide a little bit of information on some of the frequently asked questions on our grants process. Chris, do you want to take the mic?
Sure. Thanks, Sam. We've received several questions related to how the payment process will work for this funding. The process to make a grant payment includes multiple offices and levels of review in order to provide an appropriate level of internal control and safeguarding of Commonwealth funds. PCCD makes grant payments on a reimbursement basis. So that means the grantees incur and pay for approved grant expenditures. And then the grantee will submit a financial report in our eGrant system detailing those expenditures. As soon as that report is submitted, the assigned PCCD fiscal staff member is alerted and will review the submitted report. And if it doesn't require any additional clarification, PCCD will generate the payment to reimburse the grantee for reported expenditures. Now, once PCCD generates the payment, it is electronically submitted to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's Comptroller's Office, which reviews and approves payments for all state agencies. And once approved by the Comptroller, the payment is submitted to the Pennsylvania Treasury Department for a final review and eventual payment of funds to the grantee. And just a few quick notes, grantees must have a vendor record established with the Commonwealth's vendor management system. Grantees must also have correct banking information established within that vendor record because all grant payments will be made by ACH transfer. And finally, grantees are responsible to keep sufficient documentation to support all reported grant expenditures, and grantees should expect that this supporting documentation will be requested by PCCD. If we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. And just a few questions that we've received regarding the reimbursement process. First one, how long does reimbursement typically take? Reimbursements generally take 30 days from the time payment is initiated by PCCD until it hits the grantee's bank account. From my experience, that 30 days is pretty consistent across the board for all types of grant payments. Second question on the slide here, are there any possibilities for delays in reimbursement? Well, actual processing times may vary. I encourage you to double check your report to ensure it is correct and also ensure that you have all supporting documentation in case it is requested during PCCD's review of your report. If additional detail or clarification is needed, we may return your financial report to you for revision or clarification. Once the report is approved, we will generate a reimbursement payment. And I would say again that 30-day time frame for receipt of payment is pretty consistent. And final question on this slide, are there any alternatives to the reimbursement process? If you are eventually awarded a VIP grant, we would encourage you to work closely with the PCCD staff assigned to your project. There is an interim fiscal report option that allows you to report expenditures on a more frequent basis than quarterly, such as monthly. And reporting on a more frequent basis will reduce the amount of cash that a grantee would have to pay out prior to being reimbursed. Again, we're committed to working with grantees to assist in limiting any possible cash flow issues an organization might have as a result of an awarded project. And Sam, I think at this point, I'll turn it back over to you for the next slide.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we're in the home stretch here. Again, the funding announcement Q&A tracker addresses a number of topics and questions posed by interested applicants, including a lot that we didn't touch on today. So you should carefully review and read that document. If you can't find what you're looking for, let us know. A couple of final examples on this slide. So in terms of administrative costs and indirect cost, so applicants and recipients may apply their federally approved indirect cost rate or may use that de minimis 10% rate in accordance with PCCD and federal guidelines. I'm going to pause and see if Chris wants to weigh in any further on those types of guidelines, what they do and don't cover, just as an example. And Chris, if you're talking, you may be muted.
Thanks, Sam. First, I'd encourage folks to take a look at PCC's applicant's manual on page 28, which will give you more detail regarding indirect cost rates and applying the de minimis indirect rate. You can recover administrative costs in a number of ways. A couple Sam already mentioned. One is directly allocate costs attributable to the project within the project budget. And you can also apply your current federally approved indirect cost rate if you possess one. We will request a copy of that rate, of that federal approval, to ensure that it's applied correctly and according to the approval document. And if an organization has never had a federally approved indirect cost rate, you may apply the federal de minimis indirect rate. And again, that would have to be according to PCCD and federal guidelines, which can be found on page 28 of our applicant's manual.
Thanks, Chris.
Yep.
So another question we've gotten is when folks will learn of funding decisions. So we walked through that timeline earlier, but just to recap, applicants who submit an initial funding request are going to be notified by October 31 if they've been invited to participate in that second phase of the application process. So final recommendations for funding are going to be presented to the School Safety and Security Committee, again, at their January 11th, 2023 meeting, and approved projects are going to have a February 1st start date. So you'll know if you're in phase 2 by October 31, and phase 2 applicants will know if they've been approved for project awards on January 11. So moving right along, time for the Q&A portion of today's session. So I know there's been a lot of folks who have already submitted their chat or their question in the Q&A feature. If you haven't done so already, please feel free to use that Q&A icon to submit your questions. Our team is monitoring those incoming questions, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can over the next couple of minutes. If there are any questions that we're either not able to get to or we can't fully address during today's session, we certainly encourage folks to reach back out via our email, and we'll also be posting answers and responses to the extent possible on our Q&A section of the PCCD funding website. So I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Alyssa Subsinski, who is going to facilitate this portion of our agenda. Alyssa, you want to take it away?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Sam. So we do have some pretty good questions. Some of them are related to budgetary questions. So I think a lot of these will go to Chris. So to start, if two agencies were to combine and submit together, would they be able to combine their operating expenses?
No, we would be looking for the operating expenses during the period July 1, 2021 through June 30, 2022 of the applicant organization, the lead organization that makes direct application.
Okay, perfect. And then another question, if they were to apply, I guess this one's more for Sam. So if they were to apply for phase 1 and they were approved, are they obligated to apply for the second phase?
No, I don't think it's in our powers to force anyone to submit an application, although we certainly encourage folks who are invited to do so. If you are notified and invited and you choose not to submit that application, you could certainly let us know, and our team will make sure to track that information. It's not a contractual obligation. We won't force anyone into the grant system.
Perfect, thank you. And then the next question is about budgets. So if this person were to apply for a grant and they were to be awarded and their project period was 24 months instead of 29 months, would they have to prorate the amount that they're requesting for 24 months versus 28 months?
No, it's for up to a 29-month project period, but you do not have to prorate it if you request less than 29 months.
Okay, and our new organizations that do have all of the requirements, are they able to apply, or does this have to be for existing projects?
They would be able to apply. I would just encourage them again to take a look at the applicant readiness checklist to ensure they'd be able to handle a project like this.
Okay. And then another question for Chris in relation to what's required for documentation. Can you give some examples on what's required for documentation for administrative costs?
Well, if the person asking the question was referring to budgeting for like federally approved indirect cost rate in their budget, we would eventually, once we get to that point, we would ask to see the federal approval document. If the question was referring to documentation for actual costs, if you have, any cost that's budgeted in and actually expenditures are claimed against a budgeted line item, we would request supporting documentation such as accounting system documentation and any supporting documentation such as invoices, purchase orders, things of that nature. If it's personnel, timesheets. I think I'd stop there with that. If the person asking the question has additional questions, once we get to the application stage, the financial person assigned to that grant would be able to help them through the application and financial report portion of that.
Okay. And then I have one final question that I believe we can answer. After they're awarded, is there a reporting process for fiscal and program reporting, and how often is that?
Yeah, reporting is required quarterly in our eGrants system. A financial report and program report is required 20 days after the end of every calendar quarter.
Perfect. I think that is all of the questions that we are able to answer at this time, unless anybody throws some more questions in there. I actually do have one more follow-up question. Somebody just put into the chat. So what occurs if the applicant finds they're not able to implement the program as stated in their application? So if they were to come across barriers to implementation or staffing issues, what would happen then?
That's a great question. Chris, I can tackle it maybe from a programmatic standpoint, and then if you want to add anything from a fiscal perspective, maybe you can follow.
Sure.
So we get that things change. So you will be assigned program staff and fiscal staff to your grant, and they are really going to be your lifelines in terms of checking in if things aren't going quite as planned or if you're running into any stumbling blocks. In addition to noting those within your regular required program reports, we also encourage you to use those folks as some more frequent touch points so that we can provide you with advice, some resources and options that might help get things back on track, or that would allow us to make some adjustments in terms of the scope of your project if appropriate. So again, there's things like project modification requests that you can do in eGrants and other types of steps that we could take. But I would say that if you're running into issues that are really unexpected or things that you just need help with, don't hesitate to reach out. I think sometimes, I used to work in the nonprofit sector, and so I understand sometimes when funders say, oh, tell us when things are maybe not going well, right? That always seems a bit like a trap. But I will say we really do want these projects that we fund to succeed. And so a big part of that is letting us know if things are going a little bit sideways. We're certainly here to help out. We want to know about that so that we can assist. Chris, do you have any advice on the fiscal side for any of that?
I think you covered it pretty well, Sam. Again, just reiterating, to contact us sooner rather than later so that our staff and technical assistance partners can assist in getting the project, back on track kind of, or helping out.
All right, perfect. Thank you for answering that. While you were answering, we actually did get a few more questions. So this question is about budgeting for Chris. Can budgets include in-kind services if properly documented and valued?
They can include in-kind service. You can include in-kind services. We would be looking for your budget really to include the dollars that you're budgeting with our grant dollars. So you would be able to certainly explain what in-kind services are available and that you plan to use. But you're not, once you get to the application stage, you will not be required to enter that in the budget.
Perfect. And then this question is for Sam. I'm not sure if we do have a cap number on this, but do you know how many grants we anticipate awarding?
Oh gosh, that's the $1 million or the $85 million question, I guess. I think it really depends. So, again, the awards are going to range based on the size and scope of applicants. So a lot of this really depends on the number of applications that get submitted, how much money folks are coming in for, all of that good stuff. So I will just say last year we had about $45 million, give or take, for VIP and gun violence related grants. And that ended up resulting in 117 projects. But again, it really depends, I think, on what types of projects and proposals come in. But if that's a good ballpark, that's where we were at last year. And again, 85.5 million is the total that's available this year.
Perfect. We do have one additional question. I'm not sure that this is a question we can necessarily answer right now, but for Sam, if we are submitting under VIP but are also part of a CVI application, should they be concerned about duplication?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I noticed a couple other ones just, about, hey, I'm curious to learn more about the coordinated community violence intervention strategies pilot grant program. So for folks who aren't aware of that, if you check out our gun violence grants and funding webpage, there's a link in the chat to that website. You'll notice that the VIP competitive grants, that 85.5 million, is actually one of 2 VIP funding programs that are open right now. So the other one is a $15 million coordinated CVI strategies pilot grant, which is being referenced here. That is actually an eGrants funding announcement, and it's got some different funding announcement criteria and parameters on that program. So certainly encourage folks to check that out. There is a link to the funding announcement if you want to take a look at that. The eGrants deadline for that solicitation is a little later than the one for VIP. That's due on October 31st. So all that being said, when you open up either that funding announcement or the VIP funding announcement document that we've been talking a lot about today, what you're going to see in both documents is a reference to other funding opportunities. So VIP has 2 solicitations. We've certainly got a number of other solicitations that are open that deal with community violence or gun violence prevention in some form or fashion that are currently open. And so what you'll notice in those documents is there's a real big call out that's asking applicants to carefully review and consider all of those different funding opportunities. And if they do come in for more than one, that they should at a minimum note that they are submitting under more than one solicitation or are involved in an application that's submitted under more than one of those funding announcements. That's going to help make our life a lot easier at PCCD, just to understand sort of what you are involved with, what projects you are seeking funding for. And you'll also notice that there's a disclaimer that across all of those proposals, we really, again, are strongly encouraging and asking applicants to make sure that those funding asks are not duplicative. So again, hearkening back to my former life in nonprofit development, I understand fully the temptation. Grant applications are a lot of work. And so it is super tempting sometimes to just be like, well, let me just see which of these we end up getting funding for. Copy, paste, copy, paste. We are asking folks to not do that. Again, all of these solicitations have different criteria, they have different priorities, and they are all also expected to be quite competitive. And so we are asking folks to, again, make the case that's reflective of that funding announcement and that specific program. You can come in for more than one, but just really make sure that it's for unique and separate funding activities. That will also mean that on the off chance we like more than one of those proposals, that we aren't going to be funding things twice over. So again, if you have more questions about that, there is more information again on that Coordinated CVI Strategies grant program available on that website, including a recording to a webinar that we hosted a couple weeks ago specifically on that funding announcement. So certainly encourage folks to check out those resources if you want to learn more.
Perfect, thank you. And then I have 2 more questions about budgets and dollars. Will we know if a portion or all of our dollars are state or federal origin?
Yeah, I think Sam earlier in the presentation mentioned about the 3 phases, and that would occur at the last phase of award, where we'd make proper identification of which funds are used to fund your project.
Okay. And then another question about budget. So if this group calculates and determines their budget based on a calendar year versus a fiscal year, how would they denote that in their application?
Well, they should be using actual expenditures from July 1, 21 through June 30, 2022, not budgeted expenditure. They're not their budgeted amounts. Budgeted allocations, but actual expenditures during the time period, July 1, 21 through June 30, 22.
Okay, great. So I think that is all of the questions that we can answer at this time. So Sam, do you want to take it away?
Absolutely. I'd love nothing more. Thanks, Alyssa.
No problem.
All right, so our thanks to the team and our thanks to all of you for participating and all of your questions. Again, we know we weren't able to get to all of them in great detail, but rest assured, if we can answer those ones that we couldn't get to today, we will certainly follow up with that written Q&A. A copy of the PowerPoint, again, along with a recording link to today's webinar, will be published on our website for reference, and we do encourage you to check out the additional information and resources that are listed on this slide to learn more about VIP funding opportunities, as well as our other programs and resources. If you have any questions about VIP funding, please send an email to our staff at ra funding-PCCD_executive-OFC@pa.gov. That email address is referenced in the funding announcement. It's all over the website. So take a note of it. If you do have any questions over the next couple of days as you're finishing up your initial funding request, please feel free to email that. And again, we will be posting answers to the questions we do receive through that resource account on the gun violence section or VIP section rather of our funding announcement Q&A page. We will be posting those through October 11th. So that is the day before the initial funding requests are due. So again, I myself am a chronic procrastinator. So shout out to all of my fellow procrastinators in the world. But just so you know, if you do have a burning question, the worst time to have that question would be the day that this application is due. So again, do what you can to kind of get your ducks in a row a little bit sooner. If you do run into any issues day of, certainly available to assist, but just know you may be in lots and lots of good company on that front. So the early bird catches the worm and all that good stuff. But again, just know that we're here to assist however we can. So all that said, thank you again for your participation. Thanks for the work you are doing, and best of luck with the competitive process. We look forward to reviewing the proposals that come in. Have a good afternoon, everyone.